everything that you see is from Leonard's perspective, and everything you see to some degree can't be trusted because it might not have quite happened the way he understands it to have happened. The only thing I truly trust that he says. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of A Lost Plot, the podcast by storytellers for storytellers so that we can tell better stories ourselves. As always, I'm your host, Maverick, and today we have back with us Avalon, our co-host, to discuss the 2000 classic to review by Christopher Nolan, Memento, which was written, the screenplay was written and directed by Christopher Nolan, as you all know, with the story based off of the short story Memento Mori by Jonathan Nolan, which, if you are unfamiliar with the phrase, is Latin for remember that you die. This is the film we're discussing today, so getting right off the bat, Avalon, what are your initial thoughts about this film? I know it's a classic that's been around for almost 25 years, but what is your initial impression when somebody tells you about, oh, I just watched Memento, or they bring it up in the discussion?
Memento is a very unique movie in some ways because it uses a real life, like, medical condition and does it well, where it's like someone has short-term memory loss and you... like, from the audience perspective, you're kind of seeing things from the guy's perspective, a short-term memory loss. So it doesn't give you...
Right.
It, like, plays the whole, like, all these scenes in reverse. So it's almost like you have short-term memory. Like, you're seeing things, like, from a short-term memory loss perspective. Like, you don't know what's happening. You don't know what happened to the scene before because you're seeing it in reverse. But it also tells you the story at the same time. So, like, you're gradually catching up and figuring out what's going on and what's happening. It's a very interesting way to tell a story. And in that regard, it's kind of memorable just because of that.
Yeah. Have you... Well, this would almost be a spoiler alert for other people, but have you seen Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind?
I have not. I should see it, but I haven't seen that one yet. So
Sure. That's another one of those... well, I guess at this point it's a spoiler for you as well, but it's a reverse chronology film. I don't know if that's a huge spoiler, but you don't realize that at first. Whereas in this one, it's very clear that they're going back in time and doing that reverse chronology as you realize what happened in the past rather than continue to see how things progress like you normally do in a film. My personal experience with reverse chronology films has been very positive. Even though oftentimes they try to do some sort of mind-bending twist by the end as they reveal how things were from the start. But I think that generally they've paid off pretty well, and I think it's hard to do and do convincingly, so most people just don't even touch it. But I really liked what I've seen in that area, so it's generally been a positive experience for me. I will say... this movie cannot really be discussed without spoilers. So, I would highly recommend personally, if you're going to watch this film or have any inkling to watch this film before you actually listen to this review. Just because there's so much that you get out of it from experiencing the film as it goes along, rather than post-mortem, if you will, understanding it with a background in what happens. You lose some of the joy of the experience is what I would say. So based off of let's do our rating first and then get into the summary for this specific circumstance. So Avalon, based off of the 9-point system, what did you give this film?
I gave it a 5.6.
Ooh, let's go. Okay. I got a very different rating.
Okay.
I got it an 8.25.
Wow. Okay.
So this is probably one of the biggest spreads of difference we've had in a long time. Probably before the 9-point system was fully established on this podcast.
Well, okay. I'll admit where I can bet where some of our points differ. And it's probably worth the tension because I give it very low points for that, but that not because the movie isn't interesting, but because the way the story is told, it's almost like, well, is this really tense? Like, because you already know what's going to happen. it's just like you're just trying to figure out what is happening.
Right. Well,
So,
and
like,
that is a worthy discussion too.
I can already tell
get
you
to
that's
that.
probably where most of the points difference is from that.
Yeah,
probably.
and that's totally fair. So, regardless, this is a reverse chronology film. You gave it what, a 5.1?
5.6.
5.5? 5.6. So we
Okay.
got a 5.6. We got an 8.25. So a pretty big discrepancy. If you have any inkling to go, why would they give such different reviews, but want to have your own very strong opinion, which I highly encourage strong opinions. So go ahead and watch it yourself and then come back and rail at us in the comments, right? But we're going to plow right along. So after about 5 seconds, if you haven't paused, you're delving right into this. And Avalon's going to get into the summary. So, Avalon, what is Memento about?
So Memento is about a character named Leonard, who is a ex-insurance investigator, but he also has a problem where he has short-term memory loss. So he is, but one of the last things he actually remembers before he got his injury that led to him getting short-term memory loss is that his wife was attacked and essentially raped and supposedly murdered. And so he is on the hunt for the person who killed his wife. And so,
right.
But because he has short-term memory loss and he knows he has short-term memory loss, he like uses like tattoos and notes and things to tell him like past information, tell him what he's found out and where to go next.
What you get from the beginning is very different from what you get by the end.
Oh yes,
and that's
definitely.
Generally what happens in these reverse chronology movies is the initial start of all of this has led to wildly different expectations than what you think. So it's very interesting to see how this plays out. Anyways, let's start with the beginning, how they started off the film, just to get kind of the pacing in mind. But very quickly, I'm sure we're going to have to just spill the beans, talk about what occurred. So, Avalon, if you feel the need to give the brief summary of that after the opener, feel free to. But just starting off with the basics, you have this opener, right? You have this character of Leonard, who you don't even know his name's Leonard at that point yet, but he's got a gun to this guy's head. The guy's trying to explain to him what's going on, what the situation is. He can explain it all. Instead, this guy takes the gun and shoots him in the head, and then the guy dies, and he takes a picture of it, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's actually the
then
very
it reverses
opening...
time.
Yeah. Well, it's like the very first shot we see is of him like waving. It's actually in reverse, whereas like you see a photo of a dead person, and he starts shaking it, and the photo fades to black, and then it shows it going back into the camera, like him taking the picture, and then it's like he gets the gun, the shell comes back into the gun as the blood goes back into the guy's head, and then it cuts to the scene you just described, where he, like, you see this guy, they have this meeting in this abandoned area, he reads a note that says he is the murderer, and then that's when they have their conversation, he kills him. And then, from there, the movie keeps cutting, where it's like, we're going back a scene, and then watching it play forward, and then going back a scene, and then at the same time, we're cutting to this other conversation of him, like, we don't know when this is, but he's on the phone talking to someone. And that's like, we're getting information about his life, and what happened before, and about his condition, and so, like, and that's key information for the story, too, like, at some point, so...
Yep. No, absolutely. And it is interesting, too, because as you see it play out, they do all of the reverse chronology scenes in color, and all of the scenes that are playing forward in time in a natural pacing are the ones that are in black and white. And you know those two coalesce and come together when a black and white scene turns into a color scene. You say, okay, now we're fully caught up. Now we know where the film is going, and we can just simply watch from there on out. So yeah, they do very well with the physical cues, I guess, in this film, where you know where you're at just by watching it, and you don't have to have any explanation, you know, and that's more of it is important for the story how they do some of that visual aspect in this specific case. Yes. So anyways, yeah, I will say for this opener, this was one of those, this is eye-catching right off the bat type openers for me, Like I've seen this. I don't even recall Mission Impossible 3 being the most amazing movie, but I do think its openers has always stood out in my mind as one of the best openers I've seen. Where right at the beginning, the guy's asking about a rabbit's foot. You're like, okay, what's a rabbit's foot? And then he has the gun to the girl's head, and he says, I'm going to shoot her if you don't tell me where it is, and I'm going to count down to 10. He counts down to 10, and a shot rings out. And that's all you see, and then the movie starts. Like, talk about a gripping opener, right? You have the same type of thing in this, where the guy's trying to, hey, no, it's fine. I'll explain everything, and instead the guy just shoots him. That's just like, okay, what's going on? Why did he do that? There's clearly something more going on because he was trying to explain something. There's a body in the cellar. What are you talking about? Like, there's so many things that they just plant these little seeds that, oh, we'll explain this in a bit, but for now, we're just going to leave you hanging, and now somebody might be dead, right? So I thought in regards to an opener, it was well done, excellent, impressed, and they kind of keep it going from there. So I don't have any qualms with it.
Yeah, no, I actually gave it full points for the opening, too. I actually really like the opening, so...
So let's talk about I don't think we're going to get any further, to be honest, without getting... I think it'll be easier, actually, let's just say, for our discussion. And this is all going to assume that you've watched this film, like we said before. If you haven't watched this film, fire on you for not listening to our earlier warnings. Go ahead and, I think, Avalon, give your analysis of what actually happened in this film, because I think it'll be easier then to discuss the main character, the side characters, how the plot thickens, and all of that stuff, because it becomes more clear once you know the backstory.
Well, okay, so... Well, I'm going to omit from that description the big reveal that's towards the end of the movie, that was technically towards the beginning of the story, because that's key to everything that happens. Because it's kind of important, but... anyways, we're given Leonard. He is, like, we're shown because of his investigator days, he's, like, he does have experience investigating and looking into things. So, and we're shown, like, and essentially he's, like, found enough clues that, he's in this town. He starts interacting with people because he's found this clue, and meets this girl at a bar, Natalie. And she can get him information about the driver's license information, about the one clue he's found. And she also gets him to help out with her situation with Dodd.
Yes, the drug runner, yeah.
Yeah. And so he ends up getting involved, like, trying to deal with Dodd to help her out. At the same time, there's this guy named Teddy who's appears to be Leonard's friend. And he's, like, trying to get Leonard to leave town at first, but then he's, like, accompanying him later on, just, like, following him, checking in on him. And then Leonard puts all the clues together, and it seems to be that Teddy was the person who killed his wife. And so then we have the scene where he shoots him in the abandoned... the scene we get at the beginning of the movie, where he shoots him in the abandoned location.
It is interesting to think about how if you stopped, like, a scene before the end... all of that would seem 100% accurate. So that's pretty interesting. But,
yeah, no, that's why. Yeah. But the and this whole time, like, the way it plays in reverse. I mean, aside from, Leonard is portrayed as he's someone who clearly cared about his wife. He clearly loved her, and he also has made mistakes in his life. He admits that he probably because he mentions this other person who is named Sammy. What's his
Jenkis.
name? Jenkis, yeah, which was like one of his last investigations he did. Who was also a similar case, or like someone with short-term memory. He told the wife of Sammy Jenkis some things that she misconstrued, thinking that he could be healed from this short-term memory, and in the process, she gets Sammy unintentionally to kill her, and because she has diabetes, and so this event weighs heavily on Leonard because he feels like he's partly responsible for this. So we get the impression that he's not a perfect guy, but he's trying, supposedly. Though we'll also give it hints to other problems with his character, other things that he's doing that aren't.
Yeah. I mean, it's so hard to talk about this film without really revealing everything. So I think like it's worth doing just for the analysis, because you have to start. So. I think. Oh, actually, you know what? Like, it's so I get what you're trying to do, right? And I think it's interesting, right? I see if you give the analysis before the revelation at the end, you get a very different picture of the main character. And I guess not as much for the side characters, maybe to some degree, because most of their revelation comes out in the middle. But I think. Sure, I'll stop. Let's give the analysis of Leonard now, and then we'll give the analysis post the revelation. Let's do that. What are your thoughts on that whole arc that you just described?
Well, I mean, the funny thing about Leonard's character is he really doesn't change over the whole course of the movie. What changes is our perception of him over the course of the movie,
right.
Like as we get to know him. But yeah, he's like, we get the impression that he is as a character, he is very well flawed. He's like, he seems to have good motive. He has very good motive, whereas like, I'm trying to find the person who killed my wife. And he's like, I need to find them and bring justice and vengeance. Like he has plans to kill whoever the murderer is. And Teddy seems to be helping him. And so I mean, he seems like a generally upright guy. I mean, we do see he's in pain, where it's like, he misses his wife. He clearly and it's like clearly he wishes she was back. And he clearly wishes he could remember. He doesn't like that he can't remember things. He doesn't like his problem. So like we're given a lot of reason to sympathize with him. We're given a lot of reason to like root for him. Like, oh, we care about like this guy because he's got a terrible situation. And because of the way the movie is shot too, we're kind of given a glimpse into his world, more or less, how he sees things. And so it gives us added reason. Sure. Like, it just adds to the reason to, like, root for him. I was like, oh, like, we're just as lost as he is in some of these scenes.
Right.
Where it's like,
oh, yeah.
Where it's like, because his, like, he can't remember. And suddenly he's like, he's running. He's like, why am I running? What's going on? And he's just like, oh, I'm chasing someone. Oh, no, I am being chased. And it's just like things like that, where it's just like, he's having to figure these things out on the fly.
Yeah. And you get the impression that this is really tough for him. It's not easy. Yeah. And you empathize with that. And you get a sense in which, even from his perspective, where he's here to hunt the murderer of his wife, right? And bring some closure to his life and to her life by doing this, you get the impression that it's a noble cause of vigilantism, right? It's like, okay, I don't necessarily want someone going around just murdering people who they believe killed someone that they care about, but at the same time, I respect the undying love and devotion he has for his wife and how much of an impact she made on him, right? That she was the light of his life, and that kind of stereotypical understanding of utter romance. So I think that definitely his motive, his drive, and everything about his scenario is it's very easy to sympathize, right, with where he's coming from and say, yeah, that's tough, that sucks, and we can root for you in this case. Yeah. And that's pretty much all. I don't know how else you could describe his character at this point without going into.
I mean, do we want to go into the side characters real quick before we move on to anything else? Because the reality is we only have two side characters in this movie.
I mean, basically, why not? Sure, we'll save. Okay, if you watch this film, you're like, why are you guys doing this? We just are. Just accept it. You got to be left in suspense, just like we were left in suspense watching the film. Let's talk about Natalie. What are your thoughts on Natalie as a character?
I think Natalie obviously, there's all these like side characters who have barely any role, but the two characters who have the most side characters who clearly have importance to the story are Natalie and Teddy. I mean, you could arguably say Dodd, but Dodd is like, it's more like a cameo kind of thing. Like, we don't even get insight to his character. You don't even know why Natalie's against it. You don't really know much of why she's against him.
Right.
It's just like only a few like hints at things. So his character's kind of just like just there for whatever reason.
Right.
But I mean, as far as Natalie goes, Natalie is very well developed. Like, I mean, with especially everything in reverse, you think like she's helping him out at first, but then as you get to know her character, you see how manipulative she is and how she's taking advantage of Leonard to get what she wants. Because like she clearly knows, like, because he has short-term memory, he can't remember, and she is absolutely cruel to him in some scenes to manipulate him to get what she wants. And she says some awful things to him that as an audience member, you just hate her for saying. It's like, that is such an evil thing to say to him in this moment. And it's just like, but yeah, it's like her character is like, you understand, but yeah, she's a very well done, like complicated character who's just like, ugh, that you also hate kind of by the end of the movie.
Oh, it's so good because, you know, they start off and I'm not going to go too much into Teddy, but right now, because we're about to get into him, but Teddy, when he's first introduced, is just like, oh, the friendly guy who takes care of Leonard, but for some reason, you know that he's going to get shot. Why? There's something going on there. But then you see the same kind of thing with Natalie, where she's an informant for him because she cares about him, right? Yeah. That's pretty much all we know. And then as it goes on, you realize, oh no, this is someone who's using Leonard to achieve her own ends. One, she decides, okay, you're going to get rid of this character, Dodd, who's unpleasant for me. Why? We don't really know, but we know that she's using him and in some ways proving a point by using him when she says, oh, I said all these bad things about you and I know you're about to forget it. So I'm going to walk away and pretend like the pain you just gave me where you punched me in the face and, broke my lip is something that someone else did to me and you're going to go and try to stop them. And she goes out into her car, waits until his short-term memory kicks in, and then comes back in and does exactly that and sends Leonard off to get rid of this character, Dodd, instead of telling him the truth, which is that he did that himself after an angry discussion with her. So she's totally manipulative, totally an evil character. And you go, like, it's crazy. Because that happens over the course of a serious span of the movie. And so at the beginning, you see her probably in the first 15, 20 minutes. And by an hour 15 in, you go, gosh, this woman is terrible. Yes. So, amazing in regards to character development. And this is probably where you and I might have a little bit of a disagreement. And maybe this needs to be clarified in the 9 points. But I know we've had discussions, or at least me and Andrew have had discussions with this in the past about how does character development work. And there will be times in movies where, and I'm about to get to the relevance of this audience, so just hold on for a second. The relevance of character development is insofar as the audience perceives it. So you might see attempts at character development where you see someone who is, oh, they learned something super important, but then you as the audience go, that's not believable. That doesn't make sense. They suddenly changed on a whim when there is no reason for them to have changed previously or any reason that built up to this. Like, this is simply unbelievable for them as a character, and you don't buy it. And so then that might play into the believability of the world, the believability of those characters, etc. But in regards to creating a cohesive world, it's important that the audience perceives that as believable. This movie is a little unique in that character development, I believe, exists in this film, but it exists in reverse because the story is told in reverse. So, when keeping in mind character development, it's in the perspective of the audience and how do we see the characters changing throughout the experience of the story, rather than
well, it's not really characters changing per se. It's more like we're seeing them deeper. Like, we're getting a deeper look into the characters. Like, so they do kind of change because it changes our perceptions of how we see them, but it doesn't, the characters in and of themselves do not change over the course of the movie. So it's a different line between, like, character development and, character revelation. Sure. So, and I'll be honest, that doesn't, I don't take points away for that. I actually think, like, if you have good revelation of character, and as long as the character is fully developed, that is fully acceptable. Like, as long as the character is believable, because that does work. Like, just because like not every story has to have amazing character change, but we can get a deeper look into a character, and that can change how we perceive them, and that works just as well, and that's very effective. And actually, to be perfectly frank, Leonard and Natalie's character development or revelation in this movie, both are phenomenal. I like both of their character developments in this movie. Teddy is a little different for me, only because I'm not completely sure of his motive in this movie. Because he's there for so much of the movie, and it's not completely clear why he's helping Leonard out. Especially when, like at the beginning, it's like, I mean, he seems to be, and I mean, at the beginning, maybe it's because he thinks he's the murderer, and it's like he's like watching over, like, Leonard, is he gonna get too close, kind of thing. Which is kind of unbelievable. But by the end of the movie, we do certain things. There are just scenes you're like looking back, like, wait, why then this? Why that? I mean, I don't. Like, that was my question in my mind, where I started to wonder. Not that he was a bad character. He was kind of a nice foil in some ways in certain scenes of the movie.
Oh, he for sure was a great foil. Yes.
Yeah, I know he's very good for certain scenes, and he's not a bad character at all. But I just question his motive in some scenes. So it's like, does he even have a motive in this scene for what he's doing?
Yeah,
here?
That's interesting.
So I wondered a few times. So
sure.
And just for the record, this was my second time watching the movie. Like, I've seen this once before. It's like second time. Like, so already, like, having known what was going to happen, I was picking up on some of these things. Like, okay, wait, hang on. What about this? But, yeah.
No, and that's totally fair. I have only seen the film once, and I obviously thoroughly enjoyed my one watch of the film. I think it's an amazing movie. But I do think that's interesting. I didn't really pick up on that until you just said it, but I think you are right. There are certain scenes where I think those will be interesting to discuss. So unless you have more on Natalie, I think it'd be worthy to discuss Teddy's character now.
Yeah, let's go ahead and talk about Teddy. So
cool. So you see him right off the bat as this character that Leonard is about to shoot, and the revelation of the story is more or less based off of him going, why is Leonard going to shoot this character Teddy? And you're given the initial quote-unquote assumption that Leonard is doing this because he knows that Teddy killed his wife. And that's the whole point of this film to begin with, is to seek justice for his wife and bring closure to that whole arc. As you go on, you see it gets more complicated. But what is your thoughts on him? Obviously, you think he doesn't have an arc, and maybe just this might be the appropriate time to spill the beans.
Yeah, I mean, because at first you think because at first, like, you're led to believe that he is the murderer, and like we see that in Leonard's notes, he even says he only speaks lies. One about Teddy, like on one of his cards, he's always talking about Teddy. So it's almost like we're led to believe that Teddy is the villain here, and that he secretly, like, or slowly figuring out how he, like, killed his wife or whatever. And but even then, like, we just discussed Natalie. On Natalie's notes, he says he can trust her, and, like, because she's lost someone important to her or something. But then as the story progresses, we get to see how she's manipulating him, and realize that note isn't right. Like, clearly he doesn't know and doesn't realize what she's doing to him. And so, like, we're led to believe this whole time that Teddy is probably the killer or the murderer, until the scene where because you mentioned the black and white and the color, like the black and white is clearly moving forward with the phone call and the information gathering, whereas the scenes in color are like slowly going backwards until they converge on this one scene where Leonard goes to this location and kills someone named Jimmy. And that's when Teddy comes in. And then we come to realize that Jimmy, we get to realize that Leonard thinks Jimmy was the person who killed his wife at first, but now suddenly he doesn't think that anymore. Like, because it doesn't seem like, for some reason. And then, like, then it's revealed that this whole time that Leonard has already killed the man who killed his wife a year ago. He just doesn't remember. And this whole time, he's been hunting down people who he thought killed his wife. So they're all, like, he's already done it. He's just killing more people who he thought killed his wife. And Teddy kind of confronts him with this, saying, you're pursuing essentially, like, lies at this point. You're not actually killing. You've already done it. You're just, there's no point to this anymore. This upsets Leonard, who writes a note to himself, deceiving himself later, knowing about a short-term memory loss, that essentially implicates Teddy as the murderer to his wife. So it's like he essentially lies to himself pretending that Teddy is the murderer, knowing he'll forget. And that is like the huge revelation. It was like this whole time, Leonard, like Teddy is not the murderer. Leonard kills him because he thinks he is, because he deceives himself to think he is, but he's already killed the murderer a while ago.
Yep.
So,
and I don't know what your thoughts are on revelations in this film, but I thought the revelations were phenomenal.
Yeah, no, the revelation of that scene is very phenomenal. And even the revelation, though, I guess, like, that Sammy Jenkins didn't have a wife, that the whole situation was possibly him. Like, it even adds implication that even his wife didn't die, that possibly he was responsible for killing his wife with the overdose of diabetes medication, insulin. He just doesn't remember. But it creates doubt in that brief moment, and he doesn't want to believe it. And that we could start talking about themes and stuff about this point, because I think it does play very well into the themes of this movie. But
sure, let's finish the discussion on Teddy first, and then definitely I think it's appropriate to get into a final conclusion to Leonard's arc and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely Teddy is the one who reveals this to Leonard and says, hey, you've been chasing a phantom this entire time, right? Your wife didn't actually die in that scenario. You just couldn't fathom that she didn't because of your short-term memory. And in your perspective, she did die during that incident. This has led to the chaos that we now see in the world, where you are off killing people who are no longer truly the victims, and people are using you in those scenarios. And even I've used you to a certain degree. And it's just pretty much just the way it is. What were your thoughts? Obviously, you had some conflicted thoughts about Teddy. You want to go into that more, or what are your thoughts on him?
I mean, mostly it's just about his motive. I mean, at the end, especially when you finally realize he didn't kill his wife, it's like, well, then why is he following Leonard around and helping him out still? Because, like, clearly he's kind of becoming a little bit of an accomplice in the whole murders of this whole situation. But it's like, well, why? Like, what is the point then? What is Teddy getting out of this that he's helping Leonard kill random people in a way?
Right.
It's kind of just odd, and it's just, like, from a storytelling, like, a character standpoint, I just am conflicted where it's like, I feel like we need more motive. Like, we need to understand a little bit more why Teddy is doing this. I mean, his character's fine otherwise from that. It's just the motive that confuses me now. Where it's like, I just want to know why.
Right. And let me just say that everything that's shown in this film is from the main character's perspective, right? Leonard.
Of course, yeah.
And we learn by the end of this is that the protagonist's perspective is flawed. You can't necessarily trust it. And so everything we see in this film, even to a certain degree, my impression of
it's the whole inaccurate narrator.
Exactly. Everything that you see is from Leonard's perspective, and everything you see to some degree can't be trusted because it might not have quite happened the way he understands it to have happened. The only thing I truly trust that he says is when he's discussing his inner dialogue on what he thinks about things, about the world especially, and about Sammy Jenkis and things like that. Yeah. So I do trust those fully. I think those are pretty accurate because you're just getting motive at that point and understanding of his view of the world, more or less. Not so much actual occurrence of events. Yeah. But going back to Teddy, I think that... sorry, actually, I feel like I lost my own place in that little monologue. But you were talking about him. What were you saying?
No, I mean, all I said about Teddy is I'm not sure about his motive. I mean, as you said, you are seeing things from Leonard's perspective. So, and I agree. Like, it is like, even though it is inaccurate. The reason we're told is because he actually believes it. Leonard actually believes these things, even though they're not true. But it's like, but it's false. Some of it,
right? So going back to Teddy's perspective, and while he's an important character, he's a small part in the rating scale, right? He's a side character, so he has some significant attributes to it, but overall, he's not going to be a huge weighing factor, unless you think he's the antagonist, in which case that might be a worthy side discussion there.
For the antagonist, I kind of, I feel like if you're going to say there's an antagonist, it's not really a person so much as it's his condition, his short-term memory.
Right.
That is
Right.
the antagonist. So it's like he doesn't have all the information. He doesn't have all the cards in front of him. He's trying to figure it out, but it's just like his medical condition, his mind is like it's kind of working against him. Where it's like, how like because and you even see it in some of the scenes where it's like he goes to set himself up for something to take care of something, and then he doesn't remember. Whereas like he goes to ambush Dodd in his apartment. And then his short-term memory works against him, and he forgets why he's in the apartment. And he's like, he just realizes he's holding a bottle of wine in a bathroom, and he's just like, wait, what? Like, I'm not drunk, am I? And he's just like, and then he proceeds to take a shower, like, this is where he's supposed to be. And then Doc comes in, and then they have this huge fight, which is like, it's just like...
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
In truth, it's his condition. That's the antagonist him this whole time. But...
Yeah, and it's so well how they shoot that too, because you start off first seeing oh my goodness, he's in a bathroom and he's drunk. No, wait, no, he's not drunk. Is he drunk? We don't know. And then he takes a shower and then he fights this guy. Then they rewind it and you realize that he picked up the bottle not because he was drunk, but because he needed a weapon. Because somebody was going to come home and he needed to fight them. So the play out of the scenes is so good, just doing that reverse chronology, because you then realize the whole scenario and how it plays out. Very, very clever. Once again, a nod to how well they did this cinematographically. The cinematography is amazing.
Yeah.
Anyways, going back to Teddy, which I was getting to earlier, the motive that I see attributed to him is something that they state obviously, and granted, you have an unreliable narrator, but they state when he's trying to figure out who's on the phone with him, that there is a dirty cop that's trying to talk to him. Someone who's basically a bad cop who can't be trusted because he does bad things. And that is the part that it's like, is that true? Is that not? I take that to be true, and that's why you have a couple of things go on. One, Teddy, whose real name is what? John Grisham or something like that? Griswold?
John
Gamwell, yeah. John Gamwell helped him to hunt down and kill the man who killed his wife, right? A normal cop doesn't help a random dude kill people. So that fact alone means that he's a dirty cop. Two, his indication with Leonard at the murder of James Grants, the drug runner who has the fancy car and the fancy suit, right?
Yeah.
In that situation, he says, oh, we were going to split this 50-50, where clearly he's trying to profit from an unfortunate circumstance happening to a drug runner. So you could see from scenarios like that his motivation is to gain profit out of some of these scenarios, or gain what he finds funny or interesting or enjoyable, which is what I believe the guy at the front of the desk says, where he says, oh, yeah, he was making jokes or making light of this situation when he was trying to call you or something like that. He thought it was funny. So there's a couple times where it's like clearly he's getting something out of this that's less than reputable for sure. But it's not like he has a altruistic motive about it for sure. Versus with Natalie, for example, you at least get the motive that she's now going to use Leonard to get back at the person who killed her boyfriend, right? That's her motive. So it's like bad, but it's understandable where her full value in this lies. Versus with him, it's a little more, oh, he's after money, he's after some pleasure by playing pranks on this guy who can't remember anything. Like, he's kind of just sad and despicable and disgusting. So, does he have motive? I think he does. Is it some grandiose motive? No, he's kind of a loser and a bum and a disgusting character. But so is everyone else in this film, so that's what you got. Yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, I just don't know if it's strong enough to follow Leonard around as much as he does. Like, and if he is a cop, like, wouldn't he have other, like, job duties or whatever? Like, that just becomes my question. But yeah, I guess,
sure.
I mean, he does kind of give a slight explanation for that, where he says he's undercover or something. But then, I have just several questions about his character that movie
Right.
doesn't answer, and it's just like, well, so in a certain way, I'm just left not completely satisfied with his character. But I mean, yeah, it is what it is. Like, you can't really. I mean, as you said, like, you're seeing things from Leonard's perspective, so it's really hard to get that kind of information across without doing like an info dump for the audience or something, where it's like,
Sure. And you do get the impression, I will say, that this whole story happens over the span of several days, right? Because
yeah,
even at the end of the film, the beginning of the story, you hear, or actually, it would be the beginning. Sorry, no, the beginning of this film, yeah, end of the story. You have Leonard say, "Oh, these tracks are fresh from the truck that's here." So he knows that whatever happened previously with the people who are inside this house somewhere, that was not a long time ago. That happened within the past couple days, likely. So
yeah.
that's what you get. Yeah, it is questionable. Would Teddy have had the time to spend pretty much all day hanging out with Leonard over the span of, I don't know, 2 or 3 days or whatever it is that this story occurs in? Maybe, maybe not, but yeah, I mean, if he's an undercover cop, you're saying he has nothing else to do. I don't know. It's interesting. It's questionable. He's a very interesting character. He obviously adds a lot to the story. Are there some things in doubt? I think I'd be willing to acknowledge that. Sure, I think that's a fair point.
To be frank, as you said, he's a side character. Like, there's not a whole lot of points this took away from my score. It just was like something I felt like deserved mentioning. So
sure, and
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say most of my points, probably the difference in our points, probably as I said before, from Heightened Tension, but we'll get to that. I'm assuming at some point. So
yeah, I mean, we'll probably get to that next because it's around the main character. But I will say you have made a pretty decent point for Teddy. I'll probably reduce that by 0.1 because that's a pretty decent point. But let's get into the discussion of Leonard now that we have an understanding of his backstory, right? This idea that Sammy Jenkis, this character that he consistently refers to in the film as this patient that he misdiagnosed, honestly, because he initially said that it was a psychological problem, not a mental problem. And then his wife is unable to snap him out of it, and then he realizes that he probably misread his eyes when he had that first interview with him, and that his eyes were simply very good at deceiving people because he was trying to place himself as part of this world when his brain was messed up and he can't really work well in this world, so he's doing the best he can, right? And someone who's in that situation becomes very deceitful with their eyes. And because of that assumption by Leonard at the beginning that he was lying when in reality he was simply trying to fit in, he helped to prove a diagnosis that Sammy Jenkis was not was psychologically, I guess the barrier for Sammy Jenkis was that he was psychologically hindering himself, not that he was mentally or physically retarded by his experience. So, another background point. What are your thoughts on the whole character of Leonard and his development? Because obviously Sammy Jenkis, as we know at this point, probably isn't real, but at the very least we know that...
No, Sammy Jenkis is real. They don't actually... In fact, Teddy confirms at the end that Sammy Jenkis was real,
right?
But his wife wasn't. And that's where the whole part of the story gets confusing, because Leonard has this memory of his wife, Sammy Jenkins' wife, having diabetes, and how she didn't know if he was actually getting better or not. They had these fights and getting angry at him, and so she decides, maybe if I could break him out of it or something, if it's psychological. So she gets him, she tricks him several times into giving her the diabetes medication to see if it would break him out of it, to get him to remember. Except he doesn't. And he ends up giving her 3 or 4 times the dosage she's actually supposed to get. And so when she essentially dies from that in the story, essentially, according to the story, essentially Sammy kills his wife, though not intentionally. He doesn't remember. but and yeah, so this is all according to Leonard, but according to Teddy, this didn't happen because Sammy Jenkis' wife doesn't exist. This actually happened to Leonard's wife, who had diabetes, which implies that they had fights. She was trying to break him out of it, and at some point tried to get him to like break out of the psychological conditioning of the short-term memory, but it didn't work. So, but because this happened after the incident, the attack on them, Leonard doesn't remember, and he only remembers her like getting attacked, and so he thinks she died, and so he goes hunting for the murderer, the guy who killed his wife.
Right.
And which is a very believable motive, except it's false because it's like she didn't actually get murdered. So
Right. Well, and that's the big revelation, and that's the whole thing, because for Leonard,
well, she didn't get she may have been murdered by Leonard, but not murdered by. And even then, it's like he didn't intentionally murder her. It was
right.
Yeah, it's a little confusing, but yeah.
Well, it's obviously it's hard to attribute a malicious motive to someone. It would be more like a manslaughter type scenario where it's an accident because they didn't really know and they weren't intending to. Well, I guess he was intending to kill people, so I guess you could say he has motive there, but he wasn't trying to kill his wife, right?
Of course not, yeah.
What you do see is that he just had a confused and misunderstanding because he was based on this past reality where his wife didn't exist because she died. And that's all that he can remember. And that significantly affects his life going forward. And that's the thing. And this is one of the things that I thought was interesting about the film is they do very well at seeding things like motive for Leonard early in the film, where he has this discussion of Sammy Jenkis early on, and he says, you know, the big problem with someone who has this condition that I have, the problem with them is that they can do all the right things, but they take the wrong notes, and they aren't really organized because they're not going for anything. And Sammy Jenkis was just living his life, versus me, I have a reason to live. And his reason, obviously, is to hunt down the killer that killed his wife. That's his motive. And this is why it comes to a head at the end of the film. Because at the end of the film, Teddy confronts him with the truth. He says, your wife is your fault because you killed her, because you gave her too much insulin, and you've been repressing those feelings. That's a problem. And that is the truth. And Leonard is then faced with a choice. Can he accept the truth that Teddy has just given him, or is he going to deny it and go on living his life? And what does he choose? He chooses to deny it and go on living his life. And not only do that, but actually punish the person who told him the truth. Because he was afraid, by giving the truth, that he would no longer have a reason to live.
Yeah.
Whereas he had that previously. And so he kept his reason for living by killing the person who told him the truth.
Mm-hmm. I'd also say it's also a way for him to hold on to the pain of losing his wife, where it's like he doesn't want to let go and move on. He just wants to hang on to that, to like almost like he's keeping a part of her with him, but it's like he's also keeping that pain, that sadness with him. Instead of letting go and moving on and actually living life in another way. So, in a way of themes and such, it's like we're seeing a refusal to, like, this isn't a refusal to forgive, a refusal to let go. So,
yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, like, the themes in this movie are super strong. I think about even just memories and what it means to be alive, right? Or what judging people with conditions. Like, there's all sorts of themes that are presented in here, using people, things like that. But at the end of the day, it does boil down to, like, accepting reality to some degree, right? Like, are you going to accept the truth in front of you, or are you going to put yourself in a isolated tube of information where you will rip out the pages you don't agree with, which is what he does in the police report on what happened in his house. He rips out the pages that don't agree with the scenario that exists in his mind and chooses to believe a lie. And I mean, I think we see that today, honestly, in society, which is why I think this message is incredibly appropriate. Because you see
Yeah.
people, I mean, you see people today who believe in their political ideology, for example, and say, oh, I totally support Trump, and Trump is the right choice in all of these ways. And they just, when someone presents the options that, hey, maybe he's not the best choice, they just rip that out and say, oh, that's not true, or oh, they don't believe that, or it's not that bad, or whatever, and they excuse it away and just don't want to face the reality of that. Or on the other side with Kamala, who's, the other option right now, it's like the same thing where they go, oh, she's perfectly great, she's all awesome, and then somebody presents them with an alternative of, what about this, what about that? Just rip that out. Oh, that's not a big deal. Oh, that's not a problem. Oh, let's just explain that away, right? Rather than facing the reality of the complex world we live in, people are just going around and saying, oh, this is not what's true, or they don't want to accept the reality. So I think that the idea that this guy has in this movie, where he's not willing to face the reality of what happened in his life and what he's done, he's ripping that out and choosing to believe a different life because that's what's convenient for him.
Yeah, well, it's also
incredibly important message.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's also the more comfortable option. It's like, clearly 100%. That's like, and in a way, it's like, to admit that reality is different from what you perceive is also a way it's humbling. It's like, it's a way to like, it like takes that little bit out of you, that little bit of like, it forces you to like almost like apologize like in an indirect way for holding on to something that may be wrong. But it's like, and I don't think anyone naturally wants to like let go. No way. It takes more strength to let go than it does to hold on and like pursue what you think is like to hold to an ideal, I guess. Like, because it's like, not that ideals are bad or anything, but I think there's an aspect where we can take things too far, where it's like an ideal becomes this all-consuming thing that like becomes more important than the people around you, becomes more important than the like lives of others and the stakes of like the conditions of other people. Like, you can push something to an extreme where it's like people are hurt and dying, or people are getting sick or whatever because of your actions, possibly, and because you're holding to an ideal or to an idea that is actually harmful in this scenario.
Well, it's so interesting to hear that play out, right? Because when you say that, that makes me think of a similar situation, but opposite scenario, if you will, where they held to an ideal so strongly and then gave it up for the sake of saving other people, and that led to their downfall. And that's, if you are listening, that's Ned Stark in Game of Thrones, where he commits character suicide by giving up his ideals for the sake of trying to save his family, and it doesn't help, right? So I think that it's interesting to see how both of those ideas have been played out in different films, both showing negative results from them, which is part of the power of storytelling, right? You can tell very complex ideas and tell them in different ways. But it's, I think fundamentally, even with this character, is there were some flawed underlying principles with how he was living his life.
Yeah.
Some of those having to do with ideas like revenge, for example.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not just the ideal itself. It's like how your motive, your way you're going about it. And like all these things do matter as well. It's not just like the ideal itself. So I guess we should maybe include that in the whole analysis, where it's like, because the idea of avenging his wife is not I mean, depending on what you mean by that, it isn't necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. But his motive and what he wanted to do, like murdering someone, isn't right. Sure, it might give him his life some meaning in some way, but it also like it's destroying him too, where it's like he's killing people and hurting others, and like anyone who gets close to him eventually is going to get killed off by him then.
And that's exactly the problem you start to see in this film, or by the end, he's taking out people that are his closest allies, even if Teddy's a despicable person, right? That's most of my thoughts on the film. I am curious what your thoughts are on Heightening the Tension. Not that we want to spend a ton of time on that. I'm just curious where we disagree.
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously, Heightened Tension, like, for this Heightened Tension, I see it as something like things get worse, things get, like, up the ante, more or less. Like, you become more invested in the conflict. So I was like, what's going to happen next? The problem with a reversal movie, not that it's bad, it's just you know what's going to happen, so you don't actually feel like, oh, you're not sure what's going to happen. It's more like it's more like the mystery in a sense. Like you're following because you're wondering what is going on. This movie doesn't raise the stakes. It doesn't like there's not really more at stake or whatever. Like nothing is really like gets worse, but it's more like it's the mystery kind of thing where it's like you're following the movie and the story because like there's so much you don't know. You like as the audience are trying to figure out what is going on and what's happening. So it's more like it's almost like following a murder mystery or something. Like you're just trying to figure out what's going on. So like I guess that way you're invested, but I don't know if there's like heightened tension. Like I feel like there's almost like this baseline of tension throughout the whole movie that doesn't really change, at least for me. Like I didn't like so my interest was more of like a mystery, like what is happening, like what is going to happen kind of thing. So I don't know, like, and maybe I guess that's why I gave it low points because I was just like, I don't know if I like felt like the movie got like as far as the tension and conflict, I didn't feel like it got worse per se. I just was like wondering what was happening.
Right. I was just right. So for this question, as is all the questions, but especially in this case, it's about how does the audience perceive the tension getting worse, right? Do you feel more and more gripped by the movie as the story progresses? And what are the underlying causes that created that? So I think in this scenario, you are right that this is different from a normal action thriller movie where bad things happen and then worse things happen, right? Out of the frying pan into the fire type scenario. More so, this is like a murder mystery, if you will, where a lot of the motive, because even from the beginning, to a certain degree, you assume that Teddy is the bad guy. So you assume that the bad guy has already been caught and already been killed. The question is why? Or what is the motive? Or what is the situation that led to all this, right? Or and as you go on, you even have some doubt if Teddy's the bad guy who actually killed his wife. So, you know, it builds on itself. I think the question is like, do the revelations get you deeper and deeper invested and get you to a point where you are questioning things more? And that's where I attributed the heightening tension, because I was thinking as the film progressed, oh my goodness, he's in a much worse situation than I thought previously, right? As you saw, okay, Teddy actually is a bad person. He's not wholly right. Oh, okay, wow, Natalie's actually using him, which means she's not a good person. So he's actually in deeper than he even realized. And maybe Teddy's a good person. Oh my goodness, there's a dirty cop involved in this. Who's the dirty cop? Oh my goodness, Teddy's the dirty cop, right? And so like they add layer upon layer upon layer that makes you go, okay, this is actually, he's in with not just one bad person, but everyone around him is a filthy, evil individual. And that's what we're stuck with by the end of the film. So I thought that they heightened the tension pretty well based on that paradigm of understanding things. But granted, that was not, I wouldn't say that it's optimized for, and dealing with the 9-point system, right? The 9-point system hasn't had the clarification for murder mystery type films, right? I still think it applies because, as I just outlined, I think that it still works in that scenario. But versus like comedies where I just don't think it works. But it is maybe needs a little bit of clarification for the website if you're filling it out. So stay tuned for updates, people.
The other thing I kind of also gave low points on was setting. And the only reason I gave setting is because it's... And maybe it's because this is my second time watching the movie noticing this. But there are questions you start to have in your mind that... And it's because of the way the story is told. Like, you're finding things out. The first time around, I remember watching it, and like this was the problem for me the first time. I was watching it the second time, and I started to have these questions like, okay, wait, why is he doing this? Like, why is this his motive there? And you just start to notice things, and I guess maybe the character of Dodd, I feel like, and obviously he's such a small character, but I just feel like it's so weird what happened with his character. It almost felt like there needed to be more, because it just was like, he's tied up, that he attacks him in his apartment, he shoots at him in the one scene, and Natalie clearly has this animosity towards him. And I don't know, like, there's a part of me just felt like there was so much going on in that conflict that we weren't told and was never explained. And then there was also just like, Like, what did he even
True,
accomplish
right.
by chasing him out of town? Like, how would you know that he would, like, actually stay away and not come back, kind of thing?
Hmm.
And there's just
Right.
certain decisions like that throughout the movie. Just
Sure.
was like, is this realistic? Like, if you're actually trying to cover up what you did, like, he could just come back and tell police or something. I just had these like nagging questions at certain scenes. Uh,
Sure, sure. I mean, I think that's interesting. I think in regards to him coming
and
back,
also,
he might have done that. We don't
also,
know because at the end of
one other thing I
this,
feel like it should be mentioned. And I don't, and like, because clearly he gets short term memory loss from that injury where his wife is attacked, but it's just assumed for the rest of the story by Leonard that he has this short term memory loss. But how would he know that he had short term memory loss? Like, if it happened, like, without a note, but we never actually see a note on him, or I don't think we actually see a tattoo or anything that says he has short term memory loss or something. There's almost a part of me that wonders, like, I feel like there should be something here, but
maybe. I mean, like that's. I feel like that of all the points you brought up is a minor one, especially in comparison to Dodd. Like, I guess they could hypothetically show you seeing him see a little sticky note stuck to his leg every morning that says, "Hey, you have whatever type of amnesia you have, right? Redactive amnesia or whatever it's called."
yeah.
Like, and this is what it means, and this is what you're dealing with. This is what all the tattoos mean. This is what all the notes mean. Blah blah blah. Like, I guess you could have that. I think that would be incredibly prohibitive for the sake of telling the story to have him see that every time he has a memory lapse because he has it quite regularly in the film.
Yeah. No, I mean, for the
So
sake
from
of,
a
yeah.
narrative perspective, I think it would be prohibitive to have that. Maybe have it once so that you see it, but then you would have other people who would say the same thing of like, oh, he didn't look at that every time he had a memory lapse, so blah blah blah.
Well, no, I don't mind he didn't have it every single time. I just feel like, almost like, because he always has this dialogue in his head where it's like he's saying things, like explaining things almost to the audience. Like, if he had, like, how he would explain, like, in a 1 or 2 sentence, like, line that says, this happens every, like, I see this and I remind, like, I know I have short-term memory or whatever.
Right.
Or, like, something like that. Just, like, some very brief explanation. Like, because some things like that can be fixed with a very simple, short, 2-second, like, explanation. But...
Right. Well, and, like, to a certain degree, it's not that your critique is wrong, right? Because there's even a reason to explain that you're actually right on your critique based off what they say in the film, which is that he tried to prove that you could, through muscle memory or through reactive training, get yourself to learn something that you would not have learned with this prohibitive disability. Yeah. And he finds out that doesn't work for Sammy Jenkis, right? With the shocking pieces that they put in front of him as he tries to pick up random ones. He never learns that the shocked cube is always shocked, and he never learns to not pick it up, right? So I think that situation proves that if he had something to teach him that, it would have been post his traumatic injury. So unless he had some reason to experience it beforehand, maybe, which draws other questions. So I think it would have gotten a little more messy, a little less clean as a film to do that. You are technically right that, like, that is a plot hole in the film. I think I'm not going to hold it against them because that would have been tough. I think the Dodd point is more interesting because I do think you are right on that. Yeah. That because before you learn that Natalie is toying with him, his alibi makes sense. It makes sense why he's involved, what all is going on, all of that stuff. And then you find out that she's literally using him to get what she wants. Then the question is what is Dodd's affiliation? Maybe he's a drug runner with Jimmy Gantz. Maybe he's an enemy of Jimmy Gantz who's working against him. You don't really know. To a certain degree, he's not important, but to another degree, it's like he has enough screen time that you feel like he should have some relevance to the plot. Like, he kind of just shows up and tries to shoot him.
Yeah.
And you know that she's unreliable to Leonard, so how do you know that the reason she gave to Dodd is true? To some degree, it's not, because she said that he was the one that beat her up because she didn't have the drugs and the money for him. And that's not true, because Leonard's the one that beat her up, not Dodd. So yeah.
Well,
I think that's very interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know if
keep
it's
in mind
enough
that
to
the
make
first time in the chronology of the story, the first time Dodd meets Leonard, he shoots at him with very little explanation. And that's their first time technically meeting in the timeline. I mean, it's
right.
So I mean, that is a very odd way.
He does see him in Jimmy Grant's car. So if he was an opposing drug runner, there would be explanation. We're not sure that's the case, right? We don't know what Dodd's affiliation is. So I still think it's a plot point that is not solved. He's a side character, so personally, I probably wouldn't take away full points for that, because it doesn't affect the cohesiveness of the primary plot that much. But it doesn't fully make sense.
Yeah, and maybe I'm admittedly a little more harsh on Christopher Nolan as far as his world building and setting goes, because I've seen enough of his movies that there are times I just get twerked off by some of his explanations. Not all of it, because some of his movies are really good, and some of his movies just grate on me. So it's just it's a mixed bag.
Right.
It's never. So admittedly, maybe I'm a little bit more harsh on him than I should be on some things.
Right. And to be perfectly honest, on my side, I'm a big fan of Christopher Nolan. So, you're getting opposing viewpoints here, which is exactly what we're looking for on this
But you
pod.
have not seen Tenet yet.
Oh, no, I have seen Tenet, actually.
Oh, you have?
And I will admit it's not his shining moment.
Okay.
But that's for another time. That's not for today.
Okay.
And maybe I will be his ardent defender at a second view through. We'll see. But I think that's most of what we've got covered. Any last thoughts? I mean, it's 24 years later, almost 25 years after this has come out. That's a pretty long time. But I still think it stands the test of time. What do you think about the lasting impact of this?
I think the movie as a story and everything, I think it does last. And to be honest, even though I give it 5.6, to be perfectly frank, it probably deserves more like a 6.5 or higher from me. I'll admit that. Just because it actually is fairly good. And it's I would say it deserves at least one viewing. If you haven't seen this movie, and especially if you like Christopher Nolan or good movies, I think this would be worth watching. Even if you don't like the movie itself, it's worth watching at least once.
No, I'd agree. I would say
that. And I'd say, as far as Christopher Nolan's movies go, I see a lot of people when they list Christopher Nolan, the three movies they'll mention are Memento, Inception, obviously, and Interstellar.
Obviously.
But it's just and I can understand, after seeing all three, I understand why. Those three are probably his, biggest, best told stories.
Right.
Some of the ones, if you don't include the Dark Knight trilogy, but, those are, his three original ideas compared to the DC, whatever, but...
Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, and we'll get to those at some point, I'm sure, but definitely agree with the idea that this story has a lot to be told. It's definitely got some very interesting messages, not happy messages, right? But definitely sober, thought-provoking messages, and it's worth being told, especially today, right? Where we are even more into echo chambers than we have been previously. It's worth thinking about how telling yourself something and believing a worldview so much that you have to live your life staked off of it can have serious consequences, right? Now, this is an extreme of that, but it is worth considering how bad is your worldview for you if you're only listening to your worldview. And that's really the message of this film.
Yeah, and that's not to say that you shouldn't be holding to a worldview or anything. That's obviously everyone has their own worldview. The thing is, you need to be willing to let it shape and bend when you're confronted with facts or within the truth, or as you grow and learn. Obviously, everyone changes and not everyone knows the whole truth, and is your worldview resilient enough to accept new information, to accept new facts and new data? Are you willing to change ultimately if you're given solid proof on something or solid evidence, something that's true or something that's real, and not hold
Yeah.
something because you selfishly want to believe something is real or whatever. So that's the point, I think. So, but no, I
No,
Just
that's
correcting you.
honestly, that's a great clarification. That's a great point to bring to us. At the end of this podcast, we're at the end of this podcast, and that's a great message to leave us with. So,
Yeah.
that's the pod. We hope you all enjoyed. We will be back as we always are next week. See you all